Good afternoon and welcome to About Town. A growing number of Americans these days are out on a limb, relying on pseudoscience and mysticism to make important decisions in their lives, everywhere from elementary school kids visualizing themselves in certain roles or doing certain things, all the way to the White House where Nancy Reagan uses astrology. Well, if you sat in my chair and interviewed psychics as much as we do, because they are very entertaining, you'd realize how much of the time they were wrong versus looking at how many times, few times, they are right on. In other words, a healthy dose of skepticism would probably do us all a lot of good. Today we talk with a guy who's a little bit skeptic about some of these things, crystals and visualization and cults and various things that are going on in America. He's afraid we might be becoming a little brain dead. His name is John Thomas, and he's the past president of the North Texas Skeptics. He's also a board member and their media spokesperson, and he's here today to tell us a little bit about some of the pseudosciences that are going on in America. And he also says, you know, if you think those psychics are really entertaining, you could be one too with a little practice. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here.
Well, now, I'm a skeptic because I've interviewed a lot of these individuals and they're wrong so many times. Others surprise me with their accuracy, but then again, that's very seldom. I'm a skeptic. What made you a skeptic?
Well, I've always been interested in the sciences. I had an undergraduate science education and kept at it as a hobby, and I began to notice a few years ago that the more books I read on subjects like ESP or UFOs or the paranormal didn't seem to be interested in solving the problem or finding out if these things really existed. They were just interested in creating mysteries. And then I began to notice that even educated and intelligent people were buying into a lot of strange beliefs like astrology, that the planets guide their lives, that psychics could predict the future, that they could be healed by crystal power. And I became rather concerned about this. I thought it indicated a problem in our perceptions and in the way we're reasoning and in the way we're trying to evaluate information. I thought it was enough of a social problem to help found the North Texas Skeptics.
Okay, now you are an attorney.
Yes.
And you have various professions. A lot of people are skeptical. Tell me about your membership.
Well, we have a pretty wide-ranging membership. We have some academic scientists in the membership, a lot of engineers and scientists in industry. We have a number of school teachers, both science teachers and in other areas. We have airline pilots, lawyers, medical doctors, people who are just simply interested in these issues and care about living in a rational society.
So as a group, what do you do?
Well, we publish a bi-monthly newsletter, which is full of informed comment on these issues, and we try to have some investigative articles from time to time. We also have a monthly lecture series at the University of Texas at Arlington, which is open to the public, where we examine these claims or talk about the need for critical thinking in science education generally. We also have a large database of information on these subjects, so if people, for instance, want to know how does astrology work or why do people believe this, then we can tell them something factual and accurate about that.
Okay. You're saying that Americans more today are believing in pseudoscience versus what we learned in school, we call the elementary science, where you start with a hypothesis and then you test that hypothesis to get to, is it true or false? Does it work or does it not? Mm-hmm. Tell me the difference in believing in a pseudoscience.
Okay, the core of what we would call a pseudoscience is an intellectually lazy attitude toward testing belief. The person who practices pseudoscience rarely goes to the lengths of actually testing his beliefs, to go out and look for evidence. They're not empirical. They don't want to collect evidence, count the hits as well as the misses. Also, they tend to strengthen their own beliefs and put the burden of proof on skeptics. Show me I'm wrong. Show me it's not true. They're the ones that are making the claim, and they're the ones that have the burden of proof to show that what they're claiming is true. So when you see people switching the burden of proof, not looking at the evidence, and just strengthening their own personal beliefs, you've probably got a pseudoscientific approach at work.
In other words, it feels like it's right versus it is right because I've proved it.
Many beliefs can be tested. We can't test all beliefs, religious beliefs, value questions. These are just not scientific questions. But if somebody says the sun sign that you're born under affects what occupation you'll probably go into, that can be tested. We can find that out, and we have looked into it.
Oh, so what have you found about that?
Well, not me personally, but some scientists have taken the trouble to do a lot of statistical studies. A Frenchman named Glauquin, for example, surveyed 50,000 birth records in France for sun sign and tried to match them up with occupations and found out it was just a matter of chance what occupation that people went into. It wasn't connected with the sun sign at all.
Okay, so then why is it when I read the paper and they'll talk about a Scorpio that I fit the mold?
Well, it's a very natural human trait. It's called selective perception or personal validation, that when we read a general personality description, for example, you're a generous person, but you tend to be careful with your money. You sometimes worry if you've made the right decision. We tend to fit ourselves into that.
Well, everybody,
that
yeah,
spiel.
everybody's that way.
We tend to remember the things that fit us, and we forget the things that don't. In other words, we're not keeping a record. We're just absorbing this, and we're not counting the misses along with the hits. It's called personal validation, and it's really the basis of all fortune-telling systems. People
That
don't.
they give you, now I tell this story, and the crew's probably heard it before, but my girlfriend and I, for like $5 or something, went in to see one of these old gypsy women. And I stood outside the curtain, and my girlfriend works for one of the major airlines, and she's a stewardess, flight attendant, as they say now. And she went in, and the woman, she talked with the accent, and give me your hand, and we did this palm reading bit, and I'm standing out listening, and she, what do you do for a living? And my girlfriend told her that she was a flight attendant, and of course, her response was, I see a lot of traveling in your future.
Yeah, that's a good.
I thought, well, now that was certainly psychic.
It's a good and crude example. It also shows how many times that psychics in interviews are actually getting information from you. People who tend to believe in this tend not to notice that going on, but they don't realize that sometimes they're being asked questions by a psychic making just a tentative statement. For example, the psychic might say, probably you're not too satisfied with your work, and then if the person indicates that may be the case, and the psychic can follow up on that and then remind them later, didn't I tell you a few minutes ago you were dissatisfied with your job? They didn't tell them, they asked a tentative question. This is all part of a technique that's called cold reading, and psychologists have studied this, and if you want to be a practicing psychic or a stage magician that does this, you can learn how to do it.
Well, now, for instance, John Catchings, I would listen to him on the air, and that's what he would do. He would pull information from people and make a logical analysis, much as a psychologist would do who was trained. And these people believe that he's psychic. They call and say, I've had a relationship with a man for 4 years. What do you think? Well, my feelings are telling me that. And I thought, oh, brother. And so he starts, asking them questions that lead him to a logical answer. Yes. He's off the air now. What do you think about that?
Well, I know that he had a talk show on KLIF radio. I don't know all the reasons why he went off the air. KLIF told us that the ratings weren't what they desired it to be. Generally speaking, we think that the publishing industry has some kind of a moral or ethical obligation to try to present a correct view of the way the world works and use some discrimination about the kinds of beliefs they promote, at least to the extent of showing the other side occasionally, which is one reason I'm glad that I'm here today to help keep a balanced view of skepticism and irrationality.
Okay, psychics in general. Well, going back real quickly to the horoscope thing, I guess your advice is when you read these horoscopes, keep a piece of paper or something and mark down how many times they're right and how many times they're wrong about you when you read about yourself in the horoscopes. And then possibly one person might become a bit more skeptical if they, instead of discarding what was wrong and retaining what was correct, they would see on paper exactly how accurate this person is.
Sure.
You have done such with a group of psychics in the area. What did your research tell you about how often they are right?
Well, this was a good opportunity to study this. This was a group of 6 psychics who in January of 1988 made predictions for the coming year.
Who were they?
Well, one of them was John Catchings, another was his mother, Bertie Catchings, I believe. Jan Browning was one of them. They were with the Association for Parapsychology. They published a tape recording of their speech, which we obtained, of course, and made a transcript and simply found all of those predictions which were specific enough to know whether they would come true or not. And we kept a record of it throughout the year and checked them, see how many came true and how many didn't come true.
What'd you find?
Well, we found that on average the hit rate was about 20% right. We feel our grading was generous. We'll give them 20%. All the ones that came true were things that are fairly obvious to any intelligent person that reads the papers and keeps up with current affairs. That Pat Robertson would drop out of the presidential race, or that
there'd be an earthquake,
in California. Yeah. Some things they missed were the Armenian earthquake, Dan Quayle's nomination. I think you'd really have to have been psychic. That would have made a believer out of me if they'd made that prediction.
That poor guy catches so much flack.
So, from our point of view, this study to me indicates there's no reason to believe that psychics can predict the future any better than anybody else can predict the future.
In your literature, you even made the point that a person who read a great deal and was, intellectual would have fared far better in predicting what would happen in the year than a psychic would.
Well, I think at least, say, your average newspaper reporter, well-informed citizen could probably, who kept up with politics and national affairs, which is mainly where psychics make their predictions, that and disasters, I think could probably have done just about as well.
Did any of these psychics, however, to be fair, predict something that was most unusual and it did come true?
No, none of them did in this particular study.
I was hoping maybe something.
Well, I want to say that occasionally a psychic will predict something that seems really amazing, but once again, you have to look at the track record. Even a blind hog will find an acorn once in a while. You got to count the misses along with the hits before you know whether it's just chance operating.
But you're saying nothing most unusual they predicted and it did come to pass?
In this particular study, we found nothing that would be considered really unusual. For example, a really specific and unusual thing like might be on July, a certain date, the United States Navy ship in the Persian Gulf will shoot down an Iranian airliner with loss of life to all concerned. That would be an impressive hit. That would be a very specific prediction. But
is there anyone who can do that?
There's no one who can do it consistently.
But is there anyone who can predict a date that something will happen?
I'm not aware of any psychic that has actually predicted a specific time and date for an event, although sometimes they make predictions which come true later, that certain events will happen. But
because
again,
last year one of those psychics told me that someone during the inauguration would try to assassinate Bush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was the predictions for '89, but that didn't.
No, that didn't happen. And then they told me there would be a huge train wreck in like Minnesota in the snow. And that didn't happen either to my knowledge.
Well, you see, one thing psychics rely on besides
But those were specific things.
They were specific, yeah. One thing they rely on, not only the fact that you make a lot of predictions and then only count your hits, you get to grade your own papers. Another thing they rely on is many people don't realize how common a lot of things are.
Yeah.
Like earthquakes around the world. There is a major earthquake almost every day in the world somewhere. Many events are very common that people don't think about, particularly when you have a country of 250 million people. How many train wrecks, how many airplane accidents will you have? You're always going to have a certain number of those things, and it's not too remarkable to be able to predict them.
Interesting. That's something people don't think about. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about crystal balls and tarot cards and palm reading and crystals and health quackery. That's a $10 billion business in this country. Speaking to spirits, graphology, visualization, and the fact that so many young people are becoming involved in cults because they can't differentiate between a cult and something that really might benefit them. Stay with us.
Let's have a prop. Okay.
Nostradamus?
We can talk about that too.
Nostradamus. Never heard that version, Tom.